This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, everybody. Jordan Girth here with the National Weather Service Office of Observations. Thank you so much for joining us for the Satellite Book Club Seminar Series. This is session number 212. I'm glad to have Dakota Smith here, a satellite analyst and communicator from CIRA, to talk to us today about how GOES-R imagery revolutionized how we view weather. Our facilitator today is Dr. Danielle Nagul, Senior Social Science Advisor from the National Weather Service Analyze, Forecast, and Support Office. Just a few reminders before we get started. As you just heard, this session is being recorded. Please mute your microphone and turn off your webcam if you are not presenting. There will be an opportunity for Q&A after the presentation, and we ask that attendees post their questions in the chat so we can field them in the order they are asked. If you'd like to ask a longer question out loud or interact with the attendee, please just note that. And if you have not signed in with a personal account, maybe you're using an office account, please note your name when asking a question in the chat so we can follow up if necessary. We're always looking for future presenters. Glad to have Emily posting the link to the Satellite Book Club presenter facilitator form in the chat. Potentially you have something that you recently presented at the National Weather Association annual meeting or upcoming at AMS. We'd love to repurpose that presentation as part of our book club seminar series. Hope you would join us. Training team can help create materials that may be unavailable or you may be unaware of. Ross Van Til can help with that. I'd like to thank the Office of the Chief Learning Officer, the GEO and the LEO program, our presenter, facilitator, and all of you for being with us today. Also very thankful to Kashad and Emily, who work behind the scenes as part of our Tower S team to put this series off each and every week. All right, without further ado, let me introduce Dakota Smith. As I mentioned, a satellite analyst and communicator at the Cooperative Institute for Research in the Atmosphere, or CIRA. He produces daily satellite animations of high-impact weather events that are utilized across the NOAA, National Weather Service, and various media organizations. Prior to joining CIRA, Dakota was located in NCAR, working on risk perception of severe and tropical weather warnings. Outside of research, Dakota has worked in TV and digital media as a weather and television producer for WeatherNation. Dakota, welcome to the book club. Glad to have you.
Thanks, Jordan. Yeah, my name is Dakota. I'm over at CIRA, and today, despite this grandioso title, I'm really just going to be showing a lot of really cool satellite animations from the GOES-R series. And if you're at the GOES 19 launch, you might be familiar with this talk. It's a little bit extra since I have a little bit more time, but a lot of it was from that talk. Next slide. So just to give a brief sort of introduction of what I do, I am part of a team called the Image Production Team over at CIRA, and we provide imagery for a whole bunch of folks. First and foremost, we provide them for NOAA and the National Weather Service and other folks throughout the government. And you can see there's a couple of tweets here from the National Weather Service and NOAA, including some of our imagery in their social media posts, and then also in some of their blog posts as well, highlighting a fire earlier this year in the Pacific Northwest. And this is something we do almost daily, providing imagery for NOAA and National Weather Service. And that's sort of our first and foremost job is getting this imagery for the PR use of NOAA and as this in the National Weather Service. Next slide. But we also provide this imagery to folks outside of the government, and we work directly with media organizations and reporters, journalists, other meteorologists that want this imagery, that want to highlight it to their audiences. And a couple cool examples here from the New York Times, the Boot Lake fire back in 2021. The front page of the New York Times website, Scientific American included a really cool GLM view of, I believe, was Hurricane Ida. And then this is actually a pretty recent one from the Washington Post. I worked directly with the reporter or the photo journalist who made this, comparing the sizes of hurricanes using geocolor imagery because it was Hurricane Helene was such a big storm. A few recent views that were included in the news. This one on World News Tonight on ABC. It's just fantastic to see a high-res meso view of a hurricane. This is Hurricane Beryl. You can see the mesovortices on this giant screen on the top of the news. It was just fantastic to see and a really, really cool view. And then finally, during Hurricane Milton, CNN highlighted GLM visible view, 1 minute imagery of Milton arriving, really highlighting the storms ahead of Milton. That sort of became the big story with Milton were there those tornadoes that occurred before the actual landfall. So these are just a couple examples, but we also work with media organizations all the time, providing imagery like this for them to show to their audiences. Next slide. And all of this imagery can be found on this website that we run called the Satellite Library. It's about 2 years old, so it's still sort of a project in the works, not the final product. And the hope is that it's sort of an archive of satellite imagery, high impact weather events as seen through satellite imagery. It includes this GOES imagery and JPSS imagery as well, as you can see on the homepage there. We have a couple of GOES animations and stills, but then we also have the loop of the day there, is a day-night band view from VIIRS. So yeah, you can go here and download all sorts of imagery. It's particularly useful for folks trying to share the imagery, whether it's in like a publication or a newsletter or just something you want to post on social media. We have a couple different formats that you can download and post it from. Hopefully that meets whatever format you're looking for. And yeah, it's all in the Satellite Library. There's a QR code there and the link there as well. There's a few samples of what it looks like. This is an event page here highlighting the park fire. For big weather events, we make these event pages to sort of summarize events and have all the imagery in one spot for folks to download. All right, so that's a little bit of an introduction. We can move on to the next slide here. So this animation is Hurricane Sandy in 2012. This was the very first 1 minute view that I ever saw from satellite. And I remember the moment. I remember exactly where I was. I was doing homework in the Walker Building at Penn State with a couple of buddies. And I remember seeing this imagery and sort of being awestruck by the details that it showed. And I remember I think I saw it either on Twitter or YouTube, and it came with a little caveat that said, this imagery, it wasn't a caveat, but sort of an explanation that this imagery is going to be the commonplace in the next suite of satellites. And I remember hearing that and just being so excited for the future, not really knowing that I was going to work with satellite imagery professionally, just as a weather fan and weather meteorologist, I guess. And sure enough, the future is here, and it's very exciting. And I think a lot of us feel that way, that we're here in a really cool golden era of satellite imagery. So I want to highlight a few examples. Next slide. So I polled our colleagues, other meteorologists or atmospheric scientists, folks that use this imagery or look at this imagery. I polled them on Twitter to ask what views from GOES-R, the GOES-R series, what views really sort of changed how either you think about the weather or captivate you the most, as compared to previous suites or series. And so I'm going to highlight a few examples here. The number one thing, the most commented thing, was the high resolution views of tropical cyclones. Next slide. And this shows Hurricane Harvey. So sure enough, GOES 16 goes up, and shortly thereafter we get the end of the major hurricane drought, and we get just an incredible view of a major landfalling hurricane in Hurricane Harvey along the Texas Gulf Coast. This is probably one of the very first views, at least for me it was, the first view I saw of a high-res 1 minute imagery of a major hurricane making landfall. And that year obviously was crazy, and we all sort of ended up getting used to this imagery. I think when this first came out, at least to me, I was sort of shocked, and then it became sort of a commonplace. Next slide. Something that people really, I think, mentioned a lot and really captivates them is these zoomed in views of the eye. Seeing these just high definition, high res views of mesovortices within the eye, and a lot of times you see these gravity waves populating throughout as well. I will say that both of these images were 1 minute imagery. I don't think the frame rate over zoom is good enough to really capture that, unfortunately. But the spatial and temporal resolution, both in conjunction, is I think what makes this pop so much and be used so much. So yeah, this is Hurricane Ida back in 2021 from GO16. Next slide. The second most commented thing was the lightning imagery, and that was brand new to GOES. So that's no surprise that, yeah, this imagery sort of captivated folks and changed how they sort of viewed the weather. Next slide. So this is one of my favorite animations, I think, of all time. This is a view of Hurricane Ian approaching the Florida coast, and you can see all sorts of eye wall lightning within Hurricane Ian. And this imagery, these types of animations are always very popular across social media and other platforms. And this particular animation was featured in 60 Minutes. Over 20 seconds of imagery was used, which is just, usually the satellite imagery goes up for like a blip and comes back down. But this one was the full length sunrise to sunset animation of Hurricane Ian. And yeah, a lot of folks, I didn't really realize how much lightning were within eye walls. I knew that data probably existed, but just seeing it and seeing it so consistently, to me, really captivated me. So, next slide. One more view of eye wall lightning. And I had to include this with GOES 19 just going up. This is GOES 19 imagery of Hurricane Milton as a Category 5 storm with GLM flashes in the eye wall. And this imagery, I was actually working on this. We did the GLM first light imagery just the week after Hurricane Milton. So it was sort of cool that we had such a big storm, such a impressive storm right before that release. So yeah, this was Hurricane Milton in the Gulf, just as it was becoming a Category 5 storm. And again, all sorts of eye wall lightning in there. Okay, next slide. It's not just the tropical stuff. I know I've showed basically all tropical animations, but the GLM imagery is very useful and very eye-catching in storms as well. This was a derecho back in August of 2020 that marched across the Midwest, produced all sorts of power outages from Iowa across to Indiana and Ohio. And yeah, this imagery is very, very commonly used, not just for these big mesoscale events, but also, individual supercells as well. Okay, next slide. And keeping on the storms, next up, a lot of folks commented the high-res views of severe storms. So I do think the mesoscale part of the GOES R series, it plays a big role in our changing views. And I know, to me, I feel like I understand the weather a lot more. We can go to the next slide here. Because of these views, just seeing the detail, both spatially and over time. So this view is a sandwich view, IR onto visible. Again, 1 minute imagery of a supercell going across the Midwest. And you can really see the above andal cirrus plume and the overshooting tops in this view. I know it probably is lagging a little bit over zoom. But yeah, this is a really cool, really neat view. Okay, next slide. Yeah, something that really stood out to me from these 1 minute views were, so this is from GOES 18 actually. It's sort of a side view. It gives it sort of a 3D look, and catching glimpses of these updrafts and just the overall convection itself. This is a supercell in southern Wyoming back in June of 2023. You can go to the next slide here. If you zoom in a little bit, and then you can rocket back and forth to continue to get just fantastic views of the updraft itself and how that storm is forming. And you can also see the above andal cirrus plume in this view too. But yeah, some of these side views from GOES 18 of severe weather are really neat. And I had someone specifically comment about seeing updrafts with such detail. And I know this 1 minute imagery existed before, but just getting it so consistently, we get it in four places every day, 24/7 is just adds a huge benefit to us. Okay, next slide. Okay, and then finally, something I didn't include in the GOES 19 launch talk, just because of time, is the true color imagery. And I'm going to be showing a couple of geocolor animations here just because of being at CIRA and using that true color view. Next slide here. So this view is the Great North American Eclipse back in April of this year. The geocolor imagery of eclipses always, I think, amaze folks to see, such a wild event. You can see it from the ground, which is always amazing, but seeing it from above is really cool too. And we were covering this event live and sending out the imagery as it was happening. And yeah, always cool to see these eclipse events. We had one just recently, actually, that you can see with GOES 19 as well, which is really neat to get eclipse imagery just shortly after the 19 imagery became non-operational. Okay, next slide. Oh, and in that vein, had to include another GOES 19 look. This was the first light back in August of this year from GOES 19, just the full disk view. This view is a little bit different. The nighttime geocolor is not on here. It's actually just darkness. So I always like this view too. I don't see it as much as the geocolor nighttime view. Okay, next slide. And another recent view in geocolor, the still views of tropical systems always seem to be used widely and shared widely. So this is a view of Hurricane Milton on its floater approach. I sort of have fallen in love with these views right at sunset when the Terminator is just about to cross these major hurricanes, tropical systems. And this view sort of has Florida in the background there as it sort of approaches. So yeah, I thought I would include one of these. We've had so many recently that I didn't know which one to pick, so I just picked the most recent one. And the shadows that you get from, particularly at this time of day, I think really make the hurricane pop and really tell a story about the hurricane. Okay, next slide. So the examples I just shared was feedback from some of our colleagues. I'm going to share a couple comments that I've received from just folks in the general public. Maybe they don't have weather backgrounds or science backgrounds. Just general comments that we've gotten on certain images. And there's one comment. Well, there's a couple comments we get consistently, and one of them is, "I've never seen anything quite like this." So this is another sandwich view of a supercell going over Chicago. It dropped a ton of hail in the Chicago metro region. Yeah, someone commented, "Wow, I've never seen anything quite like this video." And that's something that I see very often when we post these on social media. Next slide. Same comment, different imagery. This is a GLM geocolor blend of Hurricane Dorian. This is one of the first. I actually made this animation before I was at CIRA, when I was just like really into it and it was sort of a hobby. And I posted it on CIRA. It became one of the most viral, I think, style animations ever on Twitter, at least. And someone commented, "Never seen anything like that in a hurricane. Is that lightning?" That's something that I think at least the audiences that we share it with have become more adjusted to, is seeing lightning within hurricanes and tropical systems. I think maybe there was this belief that there wasn't actually lightning as much in tropical systems. I know as a kid I was told that at some point. But yeah, sure enough, they do have lightning, especially in the outer bands, and when there's intensity changes in the eye wall as well. Next slide. And then finally, it's not just the high impact weather events. Basically, all the things I've shown thus far have been the high impact weather events. But it's also just sometimes the cool and weird imagery. So this view is a actinoform cloud over the eastern Pacific. These form as little clusters. They often sort of travel in groups or packs over the Pacific. And they form these little mini low pressure systems. And they have these sort of tentacles that spiral out. And sometimes they have little eyes. Easily one of the coolest, weirdest things on satellite imagery, I think. Someone commented on this view, "Superb, but never seen that before." So I remember the first time I saw these pretty recently, a couple years ago, Had no idea they existed. You know, I didn't see that in school or anything. And sure enough, there they are in satellite imagery pretty frequently, actually. Okay, next slide. So those are the good comments. I'm going to dabble into a couple challenges we have when it comes to sharing this imagery. We also get a lot of bad comments, and that's to be expected, especially when you reach a certain size of audience. You're going to get all sorts of comments, and some challenge. A challenge that we're currently facing and working on is how to use this satellite imagery as a moment of education, and adding context to the imagery and the weather itself. And the thread that you have to sort of balance there is engaging with people who maybe don't want to be educated, but at the same time finding the folks that do actually are looking for information, because you don't want to be just commenting with the as we call trolls online. And so the couple comments here, from what I could tell, there's a couple folks that just want to put their thoughts out there, don't really want to learn anything. But then it's tough. That middle comment there, I think they actually do. Maybe they believe in some sort of conspiracy theory, but to me it seems like they actually do maybe want some information on it. So I think a challenge that this is a broader challenge too, not just with satellite imagery, but with science and just information in general, is finding the right balance and the right technique to add context and educate when it comes to posting things on social media. Okay, next slide. And then sort of maybe a challenge isn't the right word, but a goal when it comes to sharing these animations is getting it to more people to use. We try to make sort of the best high res, best format animations so that it can be seen in that format by a large audience. So working with those folks and reaching out to those folks and teaching them even how to use satellite imagery tools. Maybe they're not just downloading it straight from the satellite library. Maybe they're using a different satellite viewer like Slider or something else. Like NOAA Star has a really good site to download imagery. Working with them to download in the best way and present in the best way is always something we're working on. Okay, next slide. And then finally, I can't go a talk without including von Karman vortices. These are some beautiful von Karman vortices off of the von Karman capital of the world, as I have dubbed it, Guadalupe Island, in the Eastern Pacific, and some really cool views. You see these all the time over there. And this is a follow-along view, looking at one vortex in particular. So it's a really cool view embedded in the stratocumulus clouds. Okay, next slide. And there's all my contact information if you didn't get it before, QR code to go to the satellite library, and my email and handle on social media. Oh, thanks, Curtis. And that's it. Thank you so much. Looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Thank you, Dakota. That was fascinating. I love looking at this. The imagery is just wonderful. So hi, everyone. Danielle Nagel here. I'm going to be your facilitator. Please stick around if you're able. We'd love to have some discussion with Dakota, Q&A with the audience. Just real quick, if you can go up to the top and where it says view everyone, if you can go change that to active camera, you can see us better. So just something to point out. Also, Emily is going to be sharing in the chat a feedback link. So if you want to fill out that feedback survey, it is in there now. Perfect timing. So just a couple more things before we go into discussion. Please join us on the next event on October 31st at noon Eastern Time. We have Patrick Ide, the Science and Operations Officer, or SUE, from the Weather Service Forecast Office in Duluth. So he's going to be talking about the Midwest Summer 2024 weather forecast challenges. And if you have any questions or comments, make sure you reach out to Kashad Bowman and Emily Maddox from the Towers S team with any questions. So with that, I will first off start with a question I have for Dakota, and then we'll switch over to some audience Q&A. So Dakota, you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'll have you expand. what satellite imagery do you find to be like kind of most popular in media use? And then maybe you can also talk about the most surprising spot you've seen the GOES-R data pop up in.
Yeah, so the GLM imagery, anytime there's lightning, that really attracts attention, especially in the hurricanes. All of the high-res meso views are very appreciated. I think most news organizations are looking for something high resolution, something that really adds to their story. And yeah, all the meso imagery does that, and the geocolor stuff too. I see a lot of still geocolor imageries. I think that is more used than for still use for like thumbnails or maybe a background or something. So yeah, those three views, GLM, meso imagery, and the true color views, I think are the most popular. Um, I've seen this imagery pop up all sorts of places. I remember actually, this is very random. Uh, I remember seeing geocolor imagery in I forget the show, but it was a TV show that I stumbled upon on HBO, and it wasn't actually an animation that I made, but it was geocolor imagery, and I was just like, it was so random. I'll have to try to find what TV show that was, but yeah, it ends up everywhere. And sometimes when I'm just like scrolling my TikTok, I'll see an animation that I made by someone who I have never heard of. So that's always really neat. Sorry, yeah, that was it, right?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
it. Thank you. I also really just want to say I appreciate, what you said about struggling with misinformation, but also the opportunity for, satellite imagery to help people with their kind of their awareness and their understanding of meteorology, weather, water, climate, even. So, I don't know if you want to give any more comments briefly on kind of how you see satellite imagery helping with offering more personalization and visualization of the hazards and risks, even when you can't actually see or experience the impacts all the time. Can it help folks kind of feel, I guess, closer to the event, or at least it's part of their life in some way?
Yeah, so with tropical cyclones in particular, we don't really have a visual other than the cone, maybe a couple of graphics. But the real visual is this satellite imagery, especially if it's a storm that is formed, it's going to be out in the water for a long time. That really gives folks context, especially if you have an animation, you can see it moving, you can see how big it is. I Yeah, to me that is like the visual that I think can provide folks with a lot of information. Like, this is actually coming, this is real. It's not just a graphic or like clip art from that someone's showing on the news. And fires as well, because those are it really is the more long term weather that I think is applicable there. The fires, if you're in like an evacuation zone, maybe sometimes you don't care about what it looks like. But I think sometimes it can add this context, like, okay, the fire is there. We can see it from silent imagery. The fire temperature imagery in particular, I know, grabs people's attention. So yeah, it's the longer term weather events, like with storms and stuff. Those are so short term that you have to be really looking at it in real time to see that imagery for like severe storms. So usually those are seen like after the fact. I think people see that, and maybe that affects their future sort of perception afterwards. But during it, I'm sure they're paying attention to their local meteorologist and trying to find a safe place to be. I think you're
No,
muted.
we can. I think Danielle's. I mean,
Okay,
audience.
I can just. Do you want
Yeah,
me
if
to
you want
read
to
from
go,
the?
yeah, go ahead and do that,
Okay,
Dakota.
sure. Um, Tim asked, "Do you think the Rayleigh corrected imagery makes the moon shadow appear much too large during eclipses?" Uh, Tim, I'm assuming yes. I will. You probably could answer that question better than me. Uh, but thank you for that link to the really corrected version. I know we did do some corrections. It might have been just for color though. Curtis can also comment on that. for the geocolor loop of the eclipse. Okay, so Edward asked,
I'm actually back now if you want me to switch
cool.
over and help you out.
Sure.
Okay, so yeah, we have Edward Bryan who asked, what new visualizations can we expect to see in the future? And is it possible to have a UI where forecasters can download and process satellite imagery without knowing a lot of code? And he thanks you for the presentation.
Cool, thanks. New visualizations, that's something I think about a lot. I think for future stuff, the first thing I really want to do is actually go back and get a more comprehensive view. And I know some of these images exist elsewhere, but I would really like to have the site and the project that we're working on have this comprehensive archive of high impact weather events. So that's sort of a one-stop shop for people that want an animation of Hurricane Andrew, for instance. We already have that one on the satellite library. As it comes to like new ways to visualize stuff, the GOES-19 launch, someone asked about sort of making these views into a 3D, more of a 3D view. And I have seen some of that with some of the software that folks use on TV. So maybe something like that would be really cool. And then obviously we're gonna have higher res, maybe not obvious, but high res imagery. Just making it more spatially high res is always fun. Is it possible to have a UI? So I don't think I can comment on that as much because I don't really work in AWIPs. I know you can I think you can export animations with an AWIPs. I feel like that's something that's done. And I don't know. There was a question about like what I use, so I might just address that since it's sort of in a similar vein. From Scott, what software do I use? And I use Premiere, Adobe Premiere, and ImageMagick. I don't use ImageMagick nearly as much, mostly because we're making a lot more videos, MP4s. So you don't need to know code to use Premiere. And with that, you just need the still imagery to then sort of animate it in Premiere. So yeah, sorry I sort of skipped ahead there to that question.
Fine. Yeah, no, great. Two questions, one answer. Okay, so moving on to Chris Smith. I was curious how you view the GLM imagery. I really like how fine the resolution is for hurricanes in your animations. For example, in AWIPS, the resolution of the FED often blocks the view of the eye. So more of a comment, but if you want to say anything.
Sure. Yeah. So all of the majority of the imagery that I make and that my team makes is straight from the CIRA slider, that imagery viewer, and we just pull the files. Sometimes we'll pull the files off of our servers or the images off of our servers themselves, and then occasionally I will make imagery, like actually make imagery with Makaitis or another program. But yeah, often we're just pulling straight from slider. And the GLM in particular, we do blend it in a certain way to blend a little bit better with the visible, so it's not so in your face, and you can only see the lightning flashes. You can't see the other detail that the visible imagery provides. So yeah, great question.
All right. Ian Zello says he's wondering about how you consider plain language in the public. The non-operational AI comment was interesting and clearly was grounded in satellite ops jargon. And I'll just say, since that's my arena, I'll say that stood out to me too, Dakota, and actually made me think about weather service jargon when we say operational or non-operational may have implications that we don't even realize. So yeah, words matter. If you want to comment on that more.
Yeah, so when we post imagery, and the captions that we use, the number one thing for me in the captions is making it readable and something that makes sense, right? That's like sort of the basic thing you want to get across there. How readable is it? Can you just read one sentence and then understand what you're seeing? That's essentially what we're going for. Using sometimes jargon is good in a way if you like go into in depth and you want to explain what the jargon says. But oftentimes, if you're just sharing one simple satellite animation, you want to sort of avoid the jargon. And yeah, the non-operational comment is very interesting, and yeah, it doesn't really make sense to people who don't see that phrase all the time, right? I think even some weather folks sort of react to like, well, why isn't it operational? Like, what makes it non-operational? So yeah, I picked that one in particular. It was a recent one as well. I was going for recent comments, but yeah, great question.
Yeah, awesome. So Katie Pitts, do you have a tutorial video or any interest in making one for how you put the videos together using Adobe Premiere?
I do not, and that is a great idea. I have actually thought about it. I used to do, and this was sort of just something as a hobby. I used to do satellite streams on Twitch, where I would just look at satellite imagery and like explore different areas, just sort of off the, just sort of winging it. But I would never go into actually making the imagery. So that's a good idea. Yeah, maybe we'll do that. Thank you, Katie.
Awesome. Joseph, first off, great imagery and talk. He says, I remember lots of press coverage on the Western wildfires and how high resolution 30-second to 1 minute GOES 16 imagery helps save firefighters from harm's way by allowing them to get out of the canyon they were in due to a wind shift that was captured on the GOES 16 imagery. We at NESDIS user services often get questions on fire weather too from the press and general public. So more a comment, but Dakota, I don't know if you want to comment anything on the fire side.
Yeah, the fire imagery is always like the worst to see because it's this horrible thing that's happening. But it is also some of the most compelling imagery that we share, particularly with the fire temperature overlaid onto a true color images is sort of the thing we do quite often. I think the one thing that I've seen folks comment on is just how big these burn areas are and the burn scars are after the fact. So yeah, thanks for that comment, Joseph.
And actually, Joseph had another comment. I want to make sure it was wrapped up. So he was asking about displaying the GLM flashpoints in AWIPS. Do you happen to know if that capability is there?
Oh, it looks like Scott answered that. I definitely cannot answer that with authority.
Gotcha. Yep. All right. Well, thank you, Scott. Appreciate it. All right. And I missed a couple things, I know, when my audio went out. So have you addressed Tim's question on Rayleigh corrected imagery?
I sort of did, yes, but there was a little bit more commentary in the chat there that I think better addressed it. So, but
Okay.
yeah, I did talk about that. Yeah.
Okay, and you also addressed what software you use to create the imagery fully.
Yes, and there's a comment at the bottom about that with ratings files or CMI files. It's just the imagery. Like I said, occasionally I'll use Makaitis to make the images, but it is often just the imagery itself, and then I'm using Premiere to edit that imagery.
Perfect. All right, I think we're caught up on questions, but please, we have 5 minutes left, folks. So if you have more questions coming in, feel free to put it in the chat. Oh, Dave Zaff, just pop one in here. Have you noticed a difference with the new GOES 19 green channel?
Green channel?
Dave, you want to pop on and clarify?
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, from what I understand, the GOES 16, 17, and 18 don't have a green channel. I'm not sure if that's the right word. And you've been able to create a green-like option that gives you the geo-color display. And now you actually have a green channel for GOES 19. So I was wondering if you noticed any differences with that availability.
I didn't know GOES 19 had a green band. I don't think it does.
No, we don't. The ABI is the same on GOES 16 through 19 with the bands are.
My apologies. I'm mixing that up with GeoXO then.
Yep. Although there's also not a green channel on GeoXO. So.
You got me excited there for a second. I was like, what? That'd be cool.
All right, cleared up that mystery. Keep them coming. We have a couple more minutes. While we're waiting for people to type, I'll throw you another question, Dakota. So how do you see GOES data? How has it and how can it, going into the future, kind of work in tandem with other observing systems, particularly since I'm from Weather Service, particularly in the context of weather forecasts and warnings?
Yeah, so from the perspective of our imagery, I hope that it adds some value in the perception, really, and folks getting those warnings and then seeing the imagery at the same time, or maybe not even at the same time. Um, I know the imagery is used, almost 24/7 by forecasters and meteorologists, with model data, and real time observations, and so all of them working together. I think you do need all of it, to make those forecasts and issue those forecasts and communicate those forecasts. Um, so yeah.
Awesome. All right, we don't have any new questions popping in, so I think I will wrap it up here. Thank you, Dakota. I'll pass it over to Jordan to close us out.
This is Kashad here. I can wrap things up. I just want to say thanks for everyone for joining today. Please don't forget the book club for next week. Patrick, the Sue from NWS Duluth, Minnesota, will be discussing Midwest Summer 2024 forecast challenges. And if you have any questions about the Satellite Book Club, don't forget to contact Emily and myself. Thank you, Dakota, for presenting today, and thank you, Danielle, for facilitating. Thanks, everyone, and have a good one. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.